Pro Flandria is a network of men and women from the business world, the field of education, the media, cultural sector, and other relevant parts of society. Based upon our three main principles, entrepreneurship, values, and Flemish autonomy, we strive to ensure that the prosperity of Flanders is safeguarded for the future. Pro Flandria will take the forefront to ensure that to all European citizens, but primarily to the younger generations, more opportunities are offered. In order to achieve this, all countries will have to take up their responsibilities and take matters in their own hands, if and when necessary. Pro Flandria does not engage in party politics, but from a democratic concern denounces any anti-political behavior. This requires an open dialogue with all parties and interest groups, without reservations and without exclusions. We consider it as one of our major tasks to strongly participate and position ourselves in the public debate about governmental efficiency, nation building, and the European Union. We try to achieve our goals through activities like symposia, publications, and networking, and we always propagate business-like analysis and solutions with a focus on efficiency and fairness. In our recently published bundle of essays, Flanders and Europe, Limits and Necessity of Solidarity, we offered a forum to nationally and internationally reputed politicians, economists, and philosophers to debate about the future of European integration, the Eurozone, and nation building for Flanders. We believe that the outcome of these exchanges constitute a beacon to those Flemish politicians that opt for a strong Flanders in a strong Europe. The symposium of this evening consisted basically of three parts. In the interesting introduction of Professor Dr. Hans Verboven, our host of this evening, he elaborated on the fact that solidarity needs checks and balances. Unconditional solidarity does not help, because the receiver is not compelled to improve his own situation. In this way, this solidarity becomes irresponsible, and at the end, even immoral solidarity. Professor Dr. Hans Werner Zinn made it very clear that the rescue operations in the Eurozone have hindered the internal depreciation, lower prices for assets, labor and goods, which the troubled southern economies need to attract fresh private capital and regain competitiveness. Even a temporary exit out of the Eurozone should not be ruled out. The whole European Union faces critical times when the policy of bailout measures and purchases of government bonds would evolve to a real transfer union without organized political framework. The threat that the periphery countries will drag down the northern countries in a negative spiral is very realistic and to be avoided. The painkiller should be replaced by a very effective medicine, or the patient will die. Professor Dr. Erik Buist gave us some important insights in the roots and the results of the interregional Belgian transfers. These transfers from Flanders to Wallonia and Brussels did not produce economic convergence. No structural adjustments to the southern economy were made. And during the last decades, the various rounds of state reform have produced a serious mismatch between the competence to spend and the competence to tax, and other state reforms will follow. If we look a bit closer to the two last presentations, we see some interesting similarities. Both Belgium and the European Union suffered the consequences of stark domestic differences in competitiveness and prosperity. The debt crisis has pushed these differences into real fault lines. Pro Flandria does not question the necessity of solidarity as such. The northern European states will benefit from stable trading partners in the south, and vice versa. This solidarity, however, has to be both efficient and fair. The internal Belgian transfers from Flanders to Wallonia, calculated to be 16 billion euros per year, are falling short on both accounts. Because of their sheer size, these transfers are unfair, and neither have they led to structural economical improvements. The Belgian transfer union is placing a stranglehold on Flemish prosperity. This in turn leads to heightened tensions in the center of Europe. The Flemish concerns are not limited to domestic solidarity. On a European level as well, two heavy burdens are put on us. Flanders is already overstretched by catering for the suffering Walloon economy, and it is beyond comprehension that on top of this, one expects Flanders to take on additional engagements in caring for other debt-riding states on the European scene. Structural deficits require structural solutions. The hasty ad hoc decisions taken under pressure because of the euro crisis are not resulting in a robust solution. And we hope that our political leaders realize that a transfer union without significant changes to socio-economic and fiscal policies in Southern Europe is not desirable. Solidarity is a necessity, but should not constitute a blank check without commitments to real change. Income-supporting money flows should not withhold recipients from taking their fate in their own hands. And the Belgian experience has taught us that solidarity trap is looming around the corner. And instead of giving handouts, we must urge the debt-addicted countries to take up their responsibility. The transition will be a rude awakening for all parties involved. Yet only a sincere commitment to compromise and much discipline will be able to hold the family together. Instead of holding on to inflationary money-printing policies and burdening the Northern European countries with massive amounts of target claims that will almost be impossible to reclaim, we would be better off compelling affected countries to implement internal depreciations and radical restructuring. Only in that way they will be able to regain their competitiveness and economic health. And the composition of the Eurozone is not something that should be dogmatically retained. However, the economic turmoil is not the only problem Europe is confronted with. The democratic deficit of the European Union and the quarrels between the Council and the Commission are running high. Genuine demands for democratic legitimacy of all this was never voiced so loudly by the European citizens. Treaties and national parliaments should be meticulously respected. Governmental efficiency and discipline are the only means to safeguard that the design errors of an individual country, which happens to be in the center of the Union, will not be reproduced on a much larger scale. If Europe would Belgianize, the results would be disastrous. Even in the best of families, monetary problems can easily lead to quarrels. One day, our children will have to claim back the debts made by previous generations in southern countries to finance their consumption. Family members, friends, and neighbors will be turned into debtors and creditors. A failing and unfair transfer system will create tension and unrest within the European family. And wasn't the euro created to bring tranquility and peace? The almost self-evident way in which the Belgian North-South transfers were perceived did not bring the Flemish and Walloons closer together. To the contrary, Belgium will disintegrate as a result of it. In a country with insurmountable socio-economic and cultural differences, this will be the inevitable evolution towards a more efficient government. As such, this has not to be adverse for a further European unification. We rebuilt the semi-detached house into a standalone one, but the village remains the same. Pro Flandria is strongly convinced that Flanders and Wallonia, as independent nation states, but safeguarded from the cumbersome Belgian governmental system, will be able to create a common future on the European level in a more efficient way. As others said before, Flanders is too large for Belgium and Belgium too small for Flanders. Flanders has to become a nation state for it to be able to be a full-fledged European member state. To conclude, Pro Flandria believes that Belgium should not be a template for Europe. Belgium is the expert par excellence in terms of monetary transfers. The money flowing from Flanders to Wallonia and Brussels is good for an astonishing 16 billion euros per annum. This constitutes an assault on the Flemish prosperity and does not result in structural improvements for the southern part of our country. These money flows are part of the reason for an eventual disintegration of the Belgian Federation. Europe should be inspired by these Belgian experiences and think very carefully when centrally deciding on measures that later on will prove very difficult to be politically enforced. Too much is at stake here. When the whole continent is faced with economic decline and frustration is spreading massively, even the highly civilized West could rather quickly be confronted with revolutionary and violent movements from certain parts of its populace. We see it as our duty to avoid this at all costs. And through democratic processes and under the condition that there is a way back, independent nation states must be able to delegate parts of their sovereignty to Europe. Flanders is such a nation state in the making. It has embraced its responsibilities vis-à-vis solidarity already a long time ago, and Flanders will continue to do so. Only, however, on the grounds of a clear and enforceable agreements. We are almost at the end of the formal part of this evening. I would like to take the chance to thank Professor Dr. Hans Werner Zinn, our keynote speaker for this evening. Also would like to thank Professor Dr. Erik Buist, our specialist in Belgian transfers. I thank the Warande and the chairman Piet van Weyenberg, also present this evening, for the kind and professional welcome here in the center of Brussels, the center of Europe. Also Professor Dr. Hans Verboven, the organizer of this event, and last but not least, all members of Pro Flandria who contributed behind the scene.